Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
What is a noxious weed? That's our Farm Basics topic today.
I think the word noxious probably gives you some idea that it's not a good thing, not something that you want to have around. And in fact, a noxious weed is just one of those things you can't seem to get rid of. That's why it's a noxious weed. Noxious weeds are often perennial weeds that have root systems that are just going to creep across your farm, and they can destroy the native vegetation that you have or crops that you're trying to grow in that particular area. And since they're so difficult to get rid of, that's why they've been declared noxious weeds, causing landowners to be compelled to either control them or the county's going to come in and control them for you.
So I just think back years ago, I was in high school and we're learning about noxious weeds in ag class, and we had to memorize all these weeds. There's a whole big list of federally noxious weeds, but then in our state, we farm in the state of South Dakota. So we had to go through in South Dakota the primary noxious and the secondary noxious weeds. And the big thing that was stressed to us is, hey, if you're a farmer and you don't control a primary noxious weed, like in the county that we live in, did you know that the county can come out and spray your ground and charge you the money for it? And I said, really? They can do that? And yep, that was what was done 40 years ago.
Or they could come in and mow your crop down. I know of a farmer just in the last 10 years here that had Canada thistle growing so wildly through his cornfield, and he didn't want to spray for it, said it was too expensive to spray for it, whatever the case may be. And the county said, look, either you control it or we're going to come out and mow your crop down. And he said, go ahead and do it. He didn't think they would. He called their bluff. They came out with a mower and mowed down 8-foot tall corn to at least get the weeds knocked down before they went to seed.
Okay, so every state, every county can be a little bit different. So we just encourage you, talk to the people in your county, talk to your county extension agent and find out what are the primary noxious weeds, what are the secondary noxious weeds, what happens if I don't control them. But hey, let's face it, if we own ground, even if we're renting ground, we want to do everything we can to take care of it. So let's talk a little bit about how we are going to control some of these weeds, because usually we'll find them out in the ditch rather than in our fields. We don't see a lot of these weeds out in the fields other than maybe Canada thistle.
Okay, so why don't people get them under control? One reason, as I already alluded to, is that sometimes it's kind of expensive to control certain weeds, and that may be a deterrent. The other thing is they're in tough to get at places. When you think about real steep slopes in pastures or along river banks or along tree belts and fence lines, they aren't necessarily the easy place to get to. I mean, if it's sitting out in the middle of a field, well, that's not hard. We're going to run a sprayer out there, we can wipe stuff out, or we could do tillage or whatnot. But when you're in an area that doesn't get tillage and is very tough for a sprayer to get into, that can make it a challenge. So we have to be really cautious on which products we choose and the timing of getting those applications done.
Well, the big thing is a lot of people in their non-crop areas are just spraying 2,4-D at a relatively low rate. And that'll do fine on annual weeds. But the problem is when you've got perennial weeds, all you do is pretty much make it mad. You might burn it down a little bit, you might not even kill all the top growth, but you certainly don't kill the root system. And then you just have a plant coming up shortly after that. It ends up going to seed, the roots keep spreading, and the problem just gets worse. So that's where there are plenty of other products for non-crop areas, whether it's Tordon, Milestone, Chaparral, Remedy. You got a whole bunch of them. So just talk to your agronomist, whatever noxious weed you've got, there's certainly an answer for it. We can control almost any weed out there, and for that matter, even trees and brush. We can get them under control. You just want to use the right product in each situation.
The other thing is to use the right rate. Many times we see a problem like leafy spurge, for example, and we just deal with it in a, well, what can I do so I can get by for this year?
Yep.
So you can use this low rate that doesn't cost that much money and get by for a year. The problem with that is you're going to have to be back out there again and again. And if it's in a tough to get to place, why don't you just want to kill it right the first time? Just kill it for good so you don't have to come back. So when you think about leafy spurge, Tordon is definitely the product of choice. Now, you can't use Tordon everywhere and in all situations, but if it is a viable choice for your certain area where leafy spurge is growing, that's what you do. Let's say that you have thistles. You can use Milestone at the full rate and wipe it out roots and all. The challenge though can be if you've done some tillage in that area and chopped up some of that root system. Now it's going to be very difficult for you to control it in one pass. So if possible, do no tillage in the area and spray that herbicide solution either in the spring or in the fall. Those are the best 2 times to try and kill the weeds.
Yep, a lot of people get all worried about, oh, we're using herbicides. These are pesticides and they're so dangerous. You know what? Toradon and Milestone are pretty safe to humans and to livestock. They're nice products. And I mean, just think about this. A lot of these noxious weeds, like Darren was saying a little bit earlier, they're there because they're in tough to control areas. In other words, they're in highly erodible areas. So if you're going to go out and try to do tillage 8 times a year to try to stop these weeds, which is what it might take, is monthly tillage. Okay, well, maybe after a couple of years you can do that, but how much soil did you lose in the process? Herbicides are really nice. You can go out there one shot, one time, have it over with completely forever. You killed those weeds for good. So that's the thing that I like about herbicides. That's the nice tool we have today that people didn't have 50 or 60 years ago.
Okay, let me give you 2 other tools, because every time we talk about noxious weeds, and particularly leafy spurge, we get calls or emails from people saying, well, what about, isn't there a pest that could be used, that could be introduced into that leafy spurge patch that would kill those weeds over time? Yes, you can do that. There are biological type control options. The problem is they take quite a while. So if you've got, just 1 or 2 plants, that may not be a bad solution for you. But if you've got a huge patch that's literally destroying your land, you've got to get after it with a herbicide. That's your best choice. The other thing would be goats. I hear people say, you know what, in some of those tough to get to areas, goats will eat almost anything. And some of these weeds, like leafy spurge and others, goats will actually eat them in their early growth stages. So you definitely could use animals like goats in some cases, as long as it's not a plant that would be toxic to them. And you could potentially use biological options, but of course, you've got to find the right situations where they will work.
Well, that's it for our Farm Basics time on noxious weeds, but we've got a weed coming up later in the show that actually could be noxious in your area. We'll talk about it coming up.